Hello everyone, my name is Marcus and this is my Vibe from Armsaw Composites. I'm going to run you through how I set it up, how I tune it, and a little bit about how I fly it. Enjoy! So I've put the plane together, hooked everything up, and as you can see here on the ailerons, that the throws up and down aren't the same, and that's a pretty common problem. So the first thing to do is to set your dual rates to 80%. I've actually got them set to 80% on the entire plane, ailerons, elevator and rudder, and it gives a bit of room to move if you need to go up to 100 or 125. The next thing I do is put my differential to 0. So after we finish this little process, I'll know that 0 differential on the transmitter is 0 differential on the plane. So the way we do that is put our throws in and hop on the transmitter and actually drop the throw down. So we're looking for 12 millimeters of up and 12 millimeters of down. And then I'll do it for the other side of the ailerons. So regarding the ailerons, I will then go and set 50% differential as my starting point. So I'll do this before I go and fly it. So I've just put 50% in. So we've got our 12 up and we should have about 6 down. Okay, this is the setup of my elevator. I've just taped on my template onto the fin. I've got my 0 marked. And setting it up for the first time, I'm getting 10 millimeters of up, which is exactly what I want. I want it just about touching the boom, and then my down is not giving me enough down, so I need 10 millimeters of down and 10 millimeters of down. Okay, here we are with the rudder, and the first thing is to set the 0. Because of the way the aerofoil is shaped and because of the way the aerofoil works, if you simply line up the center equal with both high points in line with the nose, then you'll have your center. So as you can see here, the center of the trailing edge is pretty much equal with the high point you can see here and the high point you can see here, and it's in line with the fuselage going through to the nose. That's how you set your center. So setting the throws, again I've got the dual rate at 80% and I'm a little bit short on that side. I've got 15 mil, which is really all I'm after. Any more and it gets a little bit draggy. So I'll just get onto my travel. And now we've got a nice 15 mil on both sides. So I've now been flying the Vibe for 5 weeks now, and these are the settings that I'm pretty comfortable with. I'm still fine-tuning things a little bit, but comfortable enough to say this is going to give you a nice flying plane. So my cruise mode, and it turns out that this is very close to a speed mode, is 0 millimeters. I've got a thermal mode which is 2 millimeters, a second mode at 4, and a third mode at 6. Now a lot of people use a slider. I've got a Graupner MX-20 and it's got lots of flight phases, and I like to flick modes to change as opposed to move the slider. It lets me tune the plane, so for each position I can adjust the differential, I can adjust the throw, and I can adjust the aileron to rudder mix if I need to, and all of its phase dependent trim. So I can trim the plane for each of the modes how I want it to fly. So this is what I found. At 0 cruise mode, the finished differential actually ended up at 50%. So I've got 13 millimeters of up and a bit over 6 millimeters of down. The transmitter says 50%. I've then got a thermal mode, and it gives me the 2 millimeters of flap, 13 millimeters of up, and about 8mm of down. And the transmitter's telling me I had 55% differential, but my dual rates have gone up slightly. Now I'm in the 4mm mode. I've got about 11mm of up and just over 8mm of down. And the transmitter's telling me 65% differential. I now go into my 6mm mode. I've got just under 10, 9.5mm of up and 10mm on the down. So as you can see, there's a lot of differential in that mode. It's basically set up so the plane handles correctly, but as you can see, a lot more up, a lot more down. The wing's already doing a lot of work. You don't really want a lot more down going aileron. Otherwise you can break the airflow over the wing. So they're my settings. I've got a speed mode, and I've found the optimal to be about 1mm of reflex. I tried 2, but it doesn't quite work as well as 1. So this is if I'm coming back from downwind, big thermal, need to punch through all the sync, then I'll go into my speed mode at -1mm. The throws I've got in this mode at 12mm of up and 4.5, 5mm of down. And again, it just comes from practice, and my transmitter is telling me 40% differential. I then have launch phases. This is my rotate mode, so it's got -2mm of flap and lots of up elevator, and it's on a spring switch. The plane rotates very quickly out of my hand. I tend to throw very flat. Then I let go of the spring switch, goes into the zoom mode, so I've got -2mm of flap, and I adjust the trim so that I get the trajectory I want. So what I do is, if it's a windy day, I'll reduce the elevator on the rotate mode and reduce it on the zoom mode, and I'll have the plane go a little bit flatter, a little bit out at say 70, 80 degrees. If it's dead calm, I'll pull back the trim on the rotate mode and on the vertical mode, and I'll get the plane going pretty much vertical, 90 degrees. So again, because it's on phase dependent trim, I'll just come out at the start of the day and I'll tune the elevator for all my modes, including the launch modes, to get the trajectory I want. And I'll often change it throughout the day depending on what I want. For my brakes, I had to add a couple of extra markings on my little template. So my template's just a piece of plywood cut with a V, slips nicely over the center part of the wing and gives me the settings I need. So my brake is pretty much 30mm, which is fine. It's pretty much as I can get. I normally run about 20 as a maximum, but because the Vibe responds so well to positive flap, I was finding that at 15 to 20mm it was still floating too much. So I've increased it to 30, then make the travel limit the bottom of the flap movement. So right aileron lifts the aileron, but left aileron does not make the aileron go down any further. So set your travel limit to this point here, so it can't go down any further. You want 100% effective differential when you've got your flaps down. One thing that I do with my brakes is I have a free mixer here that mixes my throttle stick to one of my ailerons. Now every transmitter will do it slightly different, but this is the way that this does it. So it mixes throttle stick to my aileron, but only one of them, and it's only active when I'm in normal mode. So when all my normal flight phases are active. When I put it into launch mode, the two launch modes, it becomes inactive, because I don't want any throttle stick mixing to my aileron when I've come in and landed and I've launched again. So it's deactive during my two launch phase. Launch 1, launch 2, this is my switch 3, and now that I'm back in my normal mode and all my flight phases work, then this is active. If I go into this mix, what I've effectively done here is I've mixed at each point during the throttle or the brake movement. I can adjust that aileron. So I look at both ailerons and I say, oh, this one's down a little bit on the right, so I've got plus 1%. As I go to the next point, or if I start from the top, so as I pull brakes, I find that for the first 10 or 15 mil, I don't need any mix, and that's because I set it up properly in the first place. Then as I come down further, because of the angle of the flaps and the angle of the servos, I needed minus 1%. Here I needed plus 1%, and at full brake I needed 6% difference. And that makes my flaps come up and down at all points exactly the same. Okay, what we have here is my brake to elevator compensation. So on the graph here, across this way is my throttle position, and then down this way is my down elevator. So as my throttle position increases, I've got a slightly sharper down elevator curve for the first half, and then it flattens out. And I find this on all my planes generally because the flaps are very effective in the first half of their movement, but then don't increase the pitching moment very much after that. So you'll get some kind of curve. It makes a big difference having at least a 3-point curve, like I've got here, 1, 2, 3, than just one. And really, I've found you don't need any more than the 3 points. You know, some people have got 5 or 6, but it takes too long to sort it out, I think. So as I bring the flaps down, I'll get to the midpoint, and then I can just simply increase or decrease the the elevator compensation I want, and then the same for the full flap position. Just increase and decrease the amount of the mix and the amount of down elevator with my brakes. Generally what I want is the plane to drive in a little bit quicker. So the plane will come in at about 20 degrees, probably under both brake positions. So whether I've got half brake or full brake, the pitch of the plane doesn't change. It'll still come in at that nice angle. And then just before I'm due to catch it, I'll ease on the elevator a little bit, keeps a little bit of speed up, and find that I can get a good 5 to 10 meters of pretty constant height that I can judge my time, grab the tip, into my launch mode, away I go, throw the brakes away, and we're off and flying. So after flying, my elevator setting pretty much hasn't changed. I'm still running 10 mil up and 10 mil down in all my modes. That's my normal, my thermal 2, my thermal 3. So as you can see, the only thing that's changing is the elevator trim for each mode. And then this is my speed mode. And I've got 70% dual rate just on my speed mode, just to make that return from downwind that little bit easier. I also find I'm running the centre of gravity at 65 millimeters instead of 70 millimeters. And what it means is that at high speed, coming back from a long way downwind, I've just got a little bit of extra stability, and it means my return from downwind is a lot more stable. So it works for me. Otherwise, my elevator here is pretty much standard across the board. Another mixer I've got on the elevator is, in my free mixers, is an elevator to elevator curve, which is on all the time. And what it is, I think you can see it there, is that as my elevator moves down, this is up elevator, down elevator, I then get to 80% and then I get this kick. So this kicks give me an extra 2 to 3 millimeters of down elevator right at the very top of the launch, so that I can kick the plane over very, very quickly. It stops any stall occurring, and I find it very effective. This is the snap flap that I've found that works, and it's pretty much the same right across the board. The plane takes a lot of flap very efficiently. On the elevator, I have about 3mm of down, and on down elevator I've got about 2mm of up. So this is up elevator and down elevator. So 3mm up, 2mm down. Works very nice. That's in my normal mode. My first flap mode, the same. Yep, 3mm of up, 2mm on down. Flap setting 2, the same, 3mm and 2mm with down. Even for my float mode, believe it or not, it takes even more elevator. So that's 3mm of down and 2mm of up. So up elevator, down elevator. For my speed mode, looks like it's a little bit less because it's proportional to the dual rate. So I've got 2mm of up, and looks like nearly 2mm of down. So on down elevator I get up, and up elevator I get down. For my launch modes, I don't have any. That's my first launch and second launch. There's no real need. I haven't bothered setting them up for the launch. Okay, so we've been out for a fly and set up the rudder throw. The rudder throw itself hasn't changed. It's the aileron to rudder mixing. So for my cruise mode, when I apply ailerons, I'm getting about 7 or 8mm, 7.5 to 8mm of rudder with full aileron. For my thermal mode, again it's about the same. Flap thermal 2, thermal 3, and in fact the amount of rudder in all my modes, even my speed mode, this is my speed mode, just came out to be the same. So it's worked very well with that amount of rudder mix. Gives a nice smooth turn, nice coordinated turn. I don't have to be on the actual rudder too often, and by just making a nice easy aileron to rudder mix and having a nice coordinated turn, I can then concentrate on actually finding the lift. One less thing for me to have to think about means I'm thinking about the air, thinking about the lift, and thinking about centering my thermal. One additional mix I have to do with the rudder is an additional aileron to rudder mix when I pull on the brakes. Because often when you pull on the brakes you lose a lot of directional stability. I've got a switch allocated to the throttle stick, so just as I activate the throttle I get a switch come in, and what it does is, here's my normal aileron to rudder mix, and then I just pull it in and then I get 100% aileron to rudder mix. So as I pull the brakes with the aileron deflected, and then as I put it away it hits the switch, and then I'm back to normal. So again, here's my normal aileron to rudder mix. I hit a point, just a little bit of brake, and then I get this additional aileron to rudder mix as I come into land, and it really helps with that directional control. The other thing that you might be able to hear is that the aileron dual rates go to 120%. So I go from 80% aileron throw to 100% aileron throw as soon as I hit this switch position. You can hear all the servos going. So large throws, lots of control, helps me do my tip catches. Hope it helps. I'll show you the layout of my transmitter and how I use the different switches and modes. Up here is my launch mode. This is a 3-position switch. One side is sprung, the other side is normal. So this position here is normal, launch zoom, launch rotate. Once I go back into normal, these two switches here become active. Over here I've got speed, cruise and thermal. Once this switch comes into the thermal mode, I can adjust the amount of flap I have on this side, 2mm, 4mm and 6mm. So I don't have any sliders, so this is the way I get around it with the different flight phases. So these are all flight phases, all with independent trim, and I can set up different mixes and different switches on each of the flight phases. When I flick into each of these launch modes, my throttle stick becomes inactive. So what happens is that I will be in normal here, these switches will be active. I'll come in using the brakes, tip catch the plane. I will then leave the throttle stick where it is. I think it's important when you leave the transmitter to tip catch that the plane doesn't change in pitch. It gives you a much more repeatable and consistent tip catch. As soon as I flick into my launch modes, the throttle stick becomes inactive. So it can sit there. I'll do my rotate. I will launch the plane in the rotate mode. A fraction after I've launched the plane, I'll go into zoom mode by releasing the spring switch. The plane will go vertical. While it's going vertical, I'll bring the throttle stick back up to normal position. When I get to the top, I'll push over and flick into my normal mode. Once I've done that, these switches here become active, and I'll either be searching fast, floating, depending on the conditions. What I want to do is actually explain how I use my flight modes. Generally I'll launch and go straight into my 2mm mode. It gives the Vibe nice buoyancy, a little bit of speed. If I'm not sure where I'm going, or I want to actually watch what the competitors are doing, I will sit in 2mm. It means that I can move around a little bit, but also it's nice and floaty at the same time. It gives me a bit of 50-50 each way. If I decide I want to go somewhere, I'll flick into speed, probably only for 2 or 3 seconds, build up the speed back into cruise. The efficiency of the Vibe in cruise mode with zero flap is just fantastic. It just holds its energy, it keeps on going. You can get anywhere you want to go quite quickly. Once I hit the thermal, I'll be straight into my 2mm mode. So this is my thermal and 2mm of flap. And I'll be into the thermal working it. So depending on its strength, if the thermal gets stronger, I'll go into 4mm, and stronger again, I'll go into 6mm. And that really increases my, my climb rate. If I want to be then coming home, I'll flick into speed again. I'll knock this back generally to 2mm at the same time, so I'll flick both switches forward. Speed mode for just a few seconds, into the cruise, off I go, same deal again, hit the thermal, back into thermal mode, and then change this depending on the strength of the thermal. The large amounts of differential that I tend to run with the aileron to rudder mix are twofold. One is I tend to trim each of my modes with the elevator to actually fly very, very slowly. I'm sort of a minimum sink, tend to fly close to the stall. I tend to be a push pilot. Some people like to fly faster and pull. I like to fly slower and push. So the differential I have when I apply the ailerons keeps the plane grooving from that very slow speed. And so this is where you get different views on what differential you should run. So treat everything I've done here as my settings and use it as a starting point to find your own. You may have noticed the box that I've got up here. It's a Graupner Smart Box, and it's a very important tool for tuning and setting of my planes, in particular the Vibe. It's got a number of features. The first is that it has the sync rate here. It's got instantaneous sync rate per 3 seconds, and sync rate per 10 seconds. So it's great for an early morning or a late evening tuning session, where very quickly within a couple of flights I can be flicking between my different thermal modes and letting the plane settle, and this setting of sync rate per 10 seconds will average all of those little bumps and variations out and give a very accurate reflection of what the actual sync rate is. So within a single flight I could be flicking 2 or 3 times between different thermal modes and seeing what the benefit is. The other thing I can do is change my CFG, so I can have a series of forward or rearward center of gravities with the same scenario, trying the different flap settings, and this will give me a very accurate reading and a great way to tune the Vibe. The other thing this system does, which is essential for tuning launch height, is gives me instantaneous altitude. So it'll give me the altitude readout here, while I use this screen here to adjust the flap position for my launch modes. So by simply flicking the switch, I can bring up my 2 different launch modes, adjust the flap setting. I've got phase dependent trim, so I can adjust the elevator trim for each mode as well. Launch the plane, instantaneously see what the result is. Pull the brakes, come down, try another setting for either my rotate mode or my zoom mode. Launch the plane, see what the height is. So within an hour I can do 60 or 70 launches with a whole range of different settings, from 0 to -2 to -4 to even higher or even lower. For every mode I can do fast rotate mode, so I can put a lot of up trim in, I can put less up trim, I can try fast rotate with vertical, I can try a smooth rotate with 45 degrees, and I get an instant readout here of the benefit of each of my changes. Most of the time I just record them in my head. Sometimes I'll write them down on a piece of paper, and it'll give me a really good analysis about what's working and what's not. So that pretty much covers what I do setting up my Vibe. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Good luck with setting up your Vibe, and cheers.